How will I know that labor is on its way? If you are a first time expecting mama, I'm sure you are asking yourself this question. What are the signs of labor going to be? And I feel you on that one because I asked myself the same questions because I'm a first time mama. I just birthed my sweet baby girl 1 week ago. I'm 1 week postpartum and I know how it is. I asked myself this question so many times. What are the signs of labor? How will I know it's coming? What are the things, the body changes that I may go through that'll tell me that I'm getting closer to labor? So we are going to go through these things today. And if you're new here, I'm Naomi, again, a first-time mama. I just had my baby girl a week ago. I had a natural, unmedicated birth at a birth center with my midwives, and it was absolutely beautiful. So let's go ahead and get into these signs of labor. I can definitely vouch for what I'm going to share because they are all things that I noticed were changes in my body that showed me I was getting closer to labor, and things that happened in just the short few days leading up to my labor. And I just want to disclose that everybody's experience is different, okay? Just because you are experiencing these signs or you have these signs doesn't mean that you are going to go into labor right away, that you'll go into labor within a few hours, a few days, or even a few weeks, because again, everybody is different. But there are some things that you can take from this video and kind of just see like, oh, this is new. Like, I haven't experienced this before. Like, okay, this is a sign that I'm getting closer. So let's get into it. The first thing is lightening, and often referred to as lightning crotch. I actually felt this a lot leading up to labor, and this is when the baby is dropping deeper and deeper into your pelvis and you feel literally lightning crotch through your vagina. And it does feel like lightning. Like, there's really no other way to describe it. It really does feel like that. But during like the last week of before I gave birth, it was definitely something that I started to feel even more. So it's something that you can feel during pregnancy, because I definitely experienced it in my third trimester, early third trimester, and just kind of like leading up. But I did start to feel it more and more strongly the closer that I got to my labor. So if you are feeling lightning crotch already, just kind of take note of how it feels, how often you're feeling it, and it could be something that you start to feel more and more as labor approaches. The next thing is Braxton Hicks contractions. Now, some people experience Braxton Hicks contractions very early on. Some experience it in the second trimester. For me, I didn't start experiencing them until my third trimester, but I did not feel them. I noticed my stomach was getting tight, but I didn't feel them. And so in my experience with Braxton Hicks, as far as a sign of labor, they're practice contractions. So it's your uterus practicing contracting, getting ready for labor. So just because you're having Braxton Hicks doesn't mean that labor is necessarily close by. But in my experience, I did not feel my Braxton Hicks contractions until until about, I would say, like a week or two, like a week before I went into labor. I actually really started feeling them very strongly. It went from not feeling them at all to actually feeling them, feeling the contraction happening. Now, it wasn't a real contraction because the pattern was very irregular. It was a lot of like crampy feeling, but it went from like no feeling to a feeling for me. So the main thing really is just noting like how things change for you. If you are experiencing Braxton Hicks, when are you experiencing it? Are you actually feeling it? And just note how things change over time. Because for me, I noticed when that flip switched from me not feeling my Braxton Hicks contractions to me feeling them, I was like, oh, this is different. And it just so happened that it was a sign of me going into labor soon, which was in the upcoming week. The next sign of labor is losing your mucus plug. Now, this is something that you can experience, and your mucus plug can rebuild itself and you not go into labor for a few days, a few weeks even. And so just because you lose your mucus plug doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to go into labor. So note when you lose it. In my case, I did start losing my mucus plug and went into labor like within the same week. So again, just because you lose your mucus plug doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to go into labor right away, but it's definitely a sign if you are in your green zone of having a baby, if you've hit the 37-week mark, 38 weeks, 39 weeks, 40 weeks, in my case 41 weeks, almost 42 weeks. If you're in that range, then losing your mucus plug could definitely be a sign of labor that you just want to watch out for. But definitely, if you do lose it, don't get your hopes up too high that you're going to go into labor, because like I said again, there are people who lose their mucus plugs and it rebuilds. Obviously, there's a greater chance that you could go into labor after losing it. So just make sure that you have that that mindset that just because these things may be happening doesn't mean that you're necessarily going into labor, because the biggest thing is keeping your mental clear. I know for me, whenever I was experiencing different signs and things like that, I really had to keep my mindset strong, because when you're ready to meet your baby, you're ready to meet your baby. And I know that in those final weeks, there's a lot of anticipation and you're like, okay, is this really happening now? Oh, does this mean it's going to happen now? Just try to keep yourself away from feeling like that, because it's only going to overwhelm you and stress you. Trust me, I did it for a couple of days and I had to get my mind right, because I was like, it's going to happen when it happens. And you just feel so much better when you just let go and trust the process. The next and most common sign of labor is your water breaking. And your water can break in a lot of different ways, or it could not break at all. In my case, it was a small trickle. That's very common. Not everyone has a large gush of fluid that just comes out and spills all over the floor. Now that can happen. You can have a large gush, you can have a trickle. In my case, my water broke and it was definitely more of like a trickle, like I peed on myself. That's really how it feels. Or your water could not break at all. Some women, their water doesn't break until they push their baby out. So if your water breaks, it definitely is one of those signs that you are closer to labor, versus with the mucus plug, it's something that can regenerate, which your water can regenerate too. That's something that my midwife assured me of when my water broke, just to reassure me that I wasn't going to have a dry birth. But once your water breaks, typically, most of the time, they say that you can have your baby within 24 hours, but it could be longer than that. In my case, I did start early labor after my water broke, and then I didn't go into active labor until like 36 to 48 hours after my water broke was when I went into active labor. So if your water breaks, you are closer to labor than some of the other signs. The next sign of labor is lower back pain, which really is lower back contractions. So I noticed that in the few days leading up to when my water broke, I started having back contractions, which felt like lower back pain, which is why I described it as that, because it really does feel like your back is aching. But I realized, oh, this is back labor. Like these are like back contractions essentially. And I hadn't felt that before. I was just feeling Braxton Hicks contractions. I hadn't felt any real contractions yet, but I started feeling that lower back pain. I was like, this is different. This is that back labor. And sure enough, same week is when I went into labor. So if you haven't felt back labor yet, then this is definitely something, maybe not all women experience it, but definitely something to keep an eye out for. If you're feeling that lower back pain and it starts to kind of feel like crampy and achy and like it's kind of moving towards the front, that could be back labor. And in my case, it definitely was something that was a sign that labor was soon. The next sign of labor is cervical changes. Now, this isn't something that you would necessarily know unless you got a cervical check, which I feel like a lot of people, there's bad raps on cervical checks. For me, as a first time expecting mama, I did allow cervical checks, more so when after my water broke is when I started doing cervical checks. I didn't really do it before then because honestly, cervical checks can be very misleading, especially because women can be like 1, 2, 3, 4 centimeters dilated for days or, long periods of time and not be going into labor anytime soon. So they can be misleading. In my case, I didn't get any cervical checks again until after my water had broke, just to kind of see where I was. And then I did get cervical checks throughout my early labor process just to see where I was, because there is a point once you reach a certain amount of centimeters dilated that you're considered active labor. So it can help you in that way know where you're at. But if you are okay with cervical checks, then that is something that can kind of help you gauge where you're at, and so that you can, do things to help your cervix soften even more and help you dilate even more to get to labor. But again, this is one of those things that you kind of have to have checked in order to really know where you're at. The next sign that labor is possibly near for you is a sudden increase in vaginal discharge. And this discharge, if it includes, if it's like pinkish and whatnot, then, that's a sign that like your cervix is ripening and that it's also dilating as well, because, there's a lot of small like blood vessels there and whatnot that do kind of rupture whenever it's stretching out, and so that can cause some bloody show. But yes, an increase in vaginal discharge and bloody show can also be a sign of labor. For me, I did experience an increase in vaginal discharge leading up to my labor, and then after my water broke, I did start experiencing bloody show. Because then shortly after my mucus plug was coming out and things like that. So this is one of those things to just kind of pay attention to, and really just going back to all the points. The main thing is just taking survey of your body. What you've experienced so far and what you haven't. And when you start noticing yourself as you're getting closer to the 37-week mark, and then past the 37-week mark, going into week 38 and 39 and 40 and 41 and possibly 42, as you're going through those, take note of the different things that you're experiencing. Like I had said for myself, I started experiencing things leading up the week that I went into labor. I started experiencing things that I hadn't experienced before. And so I was like, okay, this is new. So obviously my body was definitely preparing itself for labor, and labor was near for me. And again, all these things you may experience or you may not experience. It's really just information to help you just understand more what could be signs of labor. But they're not like surefire, like if you experience this, you're going to go into labor. I just want to make that clear, but don't stress yourself out. The main thing is just reading your body and just understanding, like if there's something in this video that I said that you didn't even know was a thing, like for example, back labor, I didn't know that was a thing, but it was something that I hadn't experienced, and when I did, just so happened to be the week that I was going into labor. So again, just knowing the different potential signs, and reading your body as you start to experience different things again in those last weeks, then that's when you can really tell that your body is getting into gear for labor. So I hope this helped you, and if you're new here, make sure you subscribe, and I will see y'all in the next one. I wish you the best in your pregnancy and labor and delivery process.